that people are, welcome everyone. I can see that people are starting to enter this fantastic webinar space. We'll just give people a little minute to enter. We've got a really good crowd of people joining us today. Do pop where you're joining us from in the chat if you'd like to. It's always really interesting to see where people are coming from, whether it be in the UK or abroad. Just for those who are just entering, we're just going to take a couple of minutes to allow everybody to get in. Welcome. I can see people from Colchester. Hi. And Brighton. Natasha in Brighton. Jim in Colchester. Good to see you. Welcome those just joining. You can see that people are still coming in. We have Andrea in Oxfordshire is now joining us, saying hello to everybody. And snowy Scottish borders. Thank you, Keith. Stephen in Nottingham. Ewan. Joyce in Tottenham in North London. Christiane from Mid Wales near Llandovery. They're coming in very fast now. Welcome. We'll just give it another couple of minutes to allow people the time to come in. Hello, Titch from North Lincolnshire, who says it's very wet where they are. But it's very balmy in Kent, says Julie. At Horsham, Susan. Welcome, another Susan in Northamptonshire. Caroline from Reading, Birmingham. Lovely sunny Birmingham. John Orchard, Woodland Heritage. Hi, John. Good to see you. Snowy in Rothbury in Northumberland. Stay warm, Katie. I can see people are still coming in. We'll just give it one more minute. Creetown is icy, says Fiona. There's a message in the chat from Claire saying, do post your questions in the Q&A function and we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end. We've got Rachel in Portsmouth in the rain and Sam in South Leicestershire. Okay. Well, I think we're about ready to start. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And first of all, a happy National Tree Week. My name is Sarah Lom, and I'm CEO of the Tree Council, which is a national charity that brings everyone together for the love of trees. And it's a very special year for the Tree Council because we're now officially 50 years old. It's our 50th anniversary. And we're taking a look back to plant a tree in 73 when Dutch elm disease swept across the land, and looking ahead to the future, to the next half century, with the emphasis on caring for trees and helping them, supporting them through to maturity. And there's been an awful lot of planting going on this week. I was in a muddy field in Gloucestershire on Tuesday, planting 150 metres of native hedgerow with volunteers there at Oakbrook Community Farm. I don't know if there's any of Oakbrook who have joined us today. And our regional school leaders are out this week as well across England, Scotland and Wales, planting with pupils at lots of different schools. And over the coming year, we're going to be planting 50 golden orchards. That's orchards with golden apples and pears and plums and apricots to celebrate our 50th anniversary. So a huge thank you to all our volunteers. Last year, you helped us plant more than 220,000 trees, and we're hoping to match that or do even more this year. Thank you to our tree wardens, to our corporate volunteers, our young tree champions. And I know that some of you as well have very kindly made a donation when you joined this webinar. So thank you very much as well for that, for supporting our work. So as part of National Tree Week, today is Action Oak Day, when we celebrate our ancient native oaks and we think about safeguarding them for the future. These fabulous trees are an incredibly precious and important part of our cultural heritage, as well as providing homes for wildlife. So Action Oak was launched in 2018 to identify and tackle the issues that oak trees face. They really need our care and vigilance, and you'll hear more about this from Mark in a minute, but we'll put a link in the chat for those of you who'd like to find out more about Action Oak. So we feel very honoured to have Mark Frith and Emma Crichton-Miller with us today, join us to share their knowledge and their enthusiasm for trees and to talk about how art has connected us with the natural world through the ages. Mark began his career as a BAFTA award-winning filmmaker, and I'm going to leave it to him to tell you the story of how he later became renowned for his tree portraits. And Emma is a fine art editor, critic. She's editor-in-chief of Design Edit and a contributor to the Financial Times, Apollo magazine, Royal Academy magazine, and much more. And I'm also delighted that we have, not on camera at the moment, but we have Emmeline Hallmark with us, who's the visionary owner of the Tree Art Gallery, which specialises in the art of trees and wood by contemporary artists. Before we hear, hi Emmeline. Before we hear from our panelists, one bit of housekeeping, just to repeat again, if you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A and not in the chat, and we will answer as many as we possibly can of them at the end. So now I'm going to invite you to settle back comfortably as Emma is going to give us a little bit of background on the context, the historic context in which Mark works. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Yes, we thought it might be helpful just to sketch in a little bit of the context in which Mark works, because his very distinctive trees, these individual portraits of one particular type of tree, come within a context of millennia of human beings responding to trees. Evolved as we are from tree creatures, we've always felt this very strong sense of connection with trees. Here, in this image you see here, this Neo-Assyrian panel, created in the 9th century BC, shows us a schematic tree, a tree of life, and the king is mirrored either side of this tree, and the god Assur is symbolized above the tree. So you get this sense very early on in our cultural history of the tree as a symbol of the power that came from the earth and which reaches up into the heavens, and which in one way or another kings and other rulers have wished to associate themselves with. As you will know, perhaps from visiting churches or traveling around countries like Italy, the tree then became very much a Christian symbol, and so would be found in mosaics or in stained glass windows, or in illuminated manuscripts. And so you have the tree of knowledge, or the tree of Jesse, showing the descent of David and then Jesus, and this symbolic sense that the tree in a way encapsulates the idea of life on earth, of human life as much as natural life, and that we associate our own sense of being descended from other people or being related to other people and connected with the earth. We associate that with the image of the tree. A very interesting thing then happens if we look at the next image. In the Renaissance, when artists began to respond not just to the symbolic power of trees, but actually to individual trees. And this is a sketch by Leonardo. And there's a wonderful quote in the book that was produced in relation to Mark's big exhibition of oak trees, where Leonardo says, "To such an extent does nature delight and abound in variety, that among her trees there is not one plant to be found which is exactly like another. And not only among the plants, but among the boughs, the leaves, and the fruits, you will not find one which is exactly similar to another." And so it's here at the time of the Renaissance that you start to get this feeling for individual trees and that sense of a sort of tenderness for the particular life of one tree and the way that its branches go off in distinctive directions depending upon the environmental circumstances it's found itself in. And in that mirror writing that you can see beneath the image, Leonardo has made notes about the different impact of light and shade on the leaves. So it's not even just this individual tree, but every minute is different. So that as the light and the wind falls on the tree, so its leaves change the way that they look. Of course, we then have the 16th and 17th century all over Europe, but particularly perhaps in Flanders and Holland, where trees that start in the background of biblical or mythological scenes gradually become so important in their own right, that an artist like Ruysdael, for instance, the tree dominates his landscapes and their movement and their the way that they structure the landscape for the eye. If we then move to the next image, thank you. We're now in the 18th century, a period of romantic trees by the likes of Salvator Rosa or Claude Lorraine has inspired 18th century landowners to plant out tremendous noble trees in the landscape, and then invite artists to paint them. And this is the tradition in which Mark really is working, this identification of individual trees in the landscape, which people have come to love and feel a real connection with. This is the Seven Sisters, and it's in the park at Welbeck. By this time also oaks in particular had come to have a particular meaning for the British. We had become identified with the oak. The oak had come to our rescue in providing the wood for our Royal Navy, as it had saved the nation on various occasions and had gone around the world. So the oak was very closely identified with British identity. And that's why in particular, there are many, many portraits of oaks. Hayman-Rook was one. This is in the late 1790s. It was then that the idea of the picturesque, that landscape might be something that you would enjoy looking at for its own sake, took hold. And in fact, the Reverend William Gilpin, who was one of the originators of that idea, wrote in his Remarks on Forest Scenery and Other Woodland Views, among individual trees, the oak is both the most accommodating in composition and the most, the oak is both the most picturesque tree in itself and the most accommodating in composition. And what he meant by that was it's not only very beautiful, but it also offers all these kinks and turns that make it a very interesting object to draw. So if we then look at the next image, by the time we get to the early 19th century, the sense of the power and force of life charging through these individual trees has developed. And indeed, trees featured in guidebooks of the era. So people would be encouraged to travel around the country and encounter these individual oaks that had become so important. And this one is the King Oak by Henry William Burgess from 1827. Certainly the artist whom I think Mark has perhaps been most inspired by is the artist who we'll see in the next image. So if we move to the next image, yes, so this is the drawing, The Great Oak at Fredville, by Jacob George Strutt. And he did an entire series of oaks. And by this time, there was very much this concept that these ancient oaks were venerable creations, that they were emblems of the persistence of values, of families, of the nation, of ideas about what it meant to be British, or what it meant even to be a human being in the world, that these trees were to be cherished. And he did a series of trees. And it is within this context that Mark approached his own series of trees. And I think that this is probably the point at which I should hand over to Mark for him to pick up the story there and describe a little how Strutt and the endeavour he had embarked upon in the early 19th century informed his own sense of admiration for the ancient oak.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Emma. It is.
Oh, sorry, this is another Jacob Strutt image, which is the Cowthorpe oak.
As Emma says, the oak is deep inside the British psyche for all sorts of reasons: its longevity, its strength, its acorns that fed pigs with pannage. So it's deep in there. As a child, I was very fortunate to live in rural Gloucestershire, one of 5 brothers who we ran pretty well feral in the countryside back in the 1950s and 60s. And I, in particular, developed a strong relationship with many of the trees around us. There were the remnants of parkland around the house. And not far away, there was an ancient oak, which as boys, we had no idea. We just knew it was this incredible thing, this extraordinary creature. And it was hollow, rather like you can see this one. We would scramble inside and outside and up and down it. And that small boy that I was really absorbed intimately the whole of that tree. And after a career as a documentary filmmaker, I returned. It sort of coincided my returning to the home that I was brought up in Gloucestershire. And within a couple of years of being back home, I had picked up a pencil and started to draw. And it's no surprise, perhaps, that the tree that I drew, I just, without thinking anything about it, I went back to this tree, which had been my childhood friend, and I drew it. And if we can have the image of the great oak at Nibley Green, that was the result. It was 2 months of drawing, and at a very large scale. I didn't know really to what end I was doing it, but I became really drawn into drawing the tree. And a very curious thing happened as I started to draw, and this character started to appear on the paper in front of me. I began to experience these rather sort of curious sensations of almost like as though the tree were drawing itself. And I began at the same time I could smell the bark, I could feel the twigs, I could the sensation of the tree being alive was quite astonishing. It was as though an automatic drawing process was taking place. And thinking about it afterwards, it has to be the case that the small boy who had climbed all over this tree as a child had become father to the man. And that boy, it was still deep inside me. And it was the most astonishing sensation. A sensation that actually continued when I began the series of oaks. So, having drawn this enormous drawing and not knowing exactly what to do about it, I started to do a little bit of research, and two things turned up. First of all, Jacob Strutt. Here was a man who'd gone around England in the 1820s, putting together a portrait series of these ancient oaks. And that was a light bulb moment for me. I thought, right, I'm pretty sure nobody else has done it since. I'm going to have a crack and do it. And I did a bit of research, and I discovered, yes, indeed, there were, as many of you know, there were sort of 50 or 60 of these incredible oak trees scattered around the country. And I set myself the task that that's what I was going to do, to go around and find these trees and do a series of these very large scale portraits. I mean, this drawing that we have on the screen at the moment, it's 1.5 meters by 1.25. So it is very large, and it's highly detailed. And that was my ambition. So having thought about that, I realized it was going to take me a long time. This drawing took about 2.5 months. So I was looking at perhaps 4 or 5 years of doing this project. How was I going to support myself? A friend who came to stay mentioned somebody called Felix Dennis, who he said was mad about trees, was a bit mad himself, had very deep pockets, and suggested I should go and see him. So I looked him up and saw that he was doing a poetry reading at Stratford Town Hall. I thought, right, it was a November evening. I put this drawing in the back of my van, rattled up to Stratford, blagged my way into his dressing room, clutching this enormous drawing, staggered in and said, Mr. Dennis, I've drawn this tree and I want to draw another series. And fortunately, Felix, he was mad about the arts, mad about trees, and he absolutely got it. It was wonderful. He said, he had this gruff, if anybody you know Felix, slightly Cockney accent. He said, right, well, you better come around and have some lunch. So off I went a couple of weeks later, sat down at 1 o'clock to have lunch with Felix Dennis. By 4 o'clock, and several bottles of wine later, he hadn't mentioned my tree drawings. He had just been rattling on full speed as was one. He suddenly said, right, what about these drawings? And within 20 minutes, he had scrawled a contract on the table, on a piece of paper, said, right, he rolled it up, stuffed it in the top of this empty wine bottle, shoved it across the table, said, show that to your wife, that'll cheer her up. And sure enough, it was a contract for as many trees. Well, initially it was 12, then we expanded to 14, and we ended up at 20 trees. And Felix was a fantastic patron of the arts. Without him, this series would never have happened. It was as though I had, in my ambition to recreate this 19th century series of trees, I'd found a 19th century patron in Felix. He was fantastic. He never, when I would take another drawing to him, he would simply roar with laughter and pleasure, and he never complained, he never suggested, he simply accepted and encouraged. Sadly, he died as I was finishing the series. We ended up doing 20 drawings together. He died, but as he was dying, he agreed with me that he should leave this series of drawings, which was now a significant collection, half of it to the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew, into their permanent collection, and half to the Heart of England Forest, which was Felix's own ambitious project to create a 30,000 acre native English forest with free public access, a project that's continuing after his death through the Heart of England Forest, which was the charity he set up to implement it. And it is an astonishing idea. So, thank you, Felix Dennis. Here I was with not quite an open checkbook, but all the time in the world. And I got together with the Tree Council, the Ancient Tree Forum, the Woodland Trust, and in particular, one of the great tree photographers that we have, Archie Miles, who was marvelous. He knows so many trees, and we sat down together, and with the help of those other people, drew up a list. And I then had a marvelous time. I had 3.5, 4 years on the road, all over Britain, looking, spending time with these wonderful trees. The actual process involved, I would track down a tree, talk to the landowner very often, go and visit it. These were always winter visits. All my series were winter portraits, because I'm very keen to, when you see a tree with in its full leaf, it is to a certain extent an amorphous shape. But in the winter, you can see this full muscularity and the wonderful turning and twisting of the oak boughs. So the whole lot were done in winter. So I would set off with all my thermals on and hot water flasks, and go to the tree, spend a day, sometimes 2 days with the tree, doing looking for the definitive field study, which would be a small drawing, and then I would return to the studio with that field study, square it up onto the big drawing paper, and set to work. That took me, as I say, it was about a 4-year project on the road, and was just the most astonishing bit of good fortune, it seemed to me, being paid to do something which I absolutely loved doing. The list of trees, we ended up with Felix, we did 20 trees. It's by no means the definitive list of ancient oaks. There are perhaps 40 or 50, I think, significant trees, but they were, all of them, characters that really stood, or to my artist's eye, were worthy of a portrait. And that's what, that was my ambition, and I think that's what we achieved. In technical terms, any of you who are out there who are actually artists or are curious as to how I would draw the tree, because it's a pencil drawing, they were all drawn on a particular paper called Fabriano paper, which was stretched onto using a watercolor technique, stretched onto a board, and I would then mark a grid onto that board, and working from the field study, I would do a very, very faint outline of the entire tree, and then I would have to work left to right, vertically, up and down the drawing paper. You can look at this one behind. You'd start on that side and you'd work across, because you can't work on top of the work you've already done. I know this is a painting, but it's the same thing. This is a recent oil portrait of a tree in Switzerland for a collector. You work across left to right, and you've got to pretty well get it right as you go, because it's very difficult on a big scale pencil drawing to go back without damaging what is under what is already drawn on the page. I suppose when I came to start these drawings, the USP, if you like, of what would my drawings be like, it would be intense detail. I was very excited in the initial drawing that's still on the screen, the great oak at Nibley Green. The idea of drawing every twig and even the buds on the ends of the twigs on a large scale was, to me, a very attractive idea. And you will see somewhere, if we can put up the image of
We'll go back, Mark, to the
Yes, sorry.
to the images. It's okay.
Yes, we've lost somebody there. Yeah. We can go to one of the close-up images. We'll go to the Bowthorpe Oak, okay? Let's go to the Bowthorpe Oak. So this is the second tree that I drew. It's a tree in Lincolnshire, and it is one of the ones that Jacob Strutt had drawn in his series. But you can see on the outline of it that every single branch goes out to the end of the twig, and the twig actually will have the buds on the end. And this was, in terms of an artistic endeavor, that's what I was attempting to do, to create intense detail that would then be put onto a very large scale, a drawing, 1.5 meters in size, and that would create something which, when you see it hanging on a wall, it works at a distance. You can see the drawing from 30 feet away, but you can walk right into it. So you can actually put your nose almost up to it. If we go to a detail now of you'll see this is a detail of the tree that I've got behind me, and that is these leaves, individual leaves. Every single leaf on the tree is painted individually, as are all the twigs. And the flowers. This is a sycamore in spring. The flowers are there in such a way that Emma, can you remove the person from behind you, please? Thank you. In such a way that the detail holds when you get right as close to it as you like, and also when you walk away from it. If we move on to the next drawing, you'll see the same principle here, that in on the edges of the twigs, you can see the buds of the trees, right into the trunk, the bark, the detail of the bark. That's what I was attempting. And I suppose I was informed by Strutt and all the other artists who'd been before me, in that I wanted to create a tree. I had the ability to separate the tree from the background. We live in an age of photographs. Photographs invariably will have the background of the tree. I wanted to pull it away and create a sort of iconic image, if you like. That's what I was. That's what I wanted to create, was an icon of the tree. And to that end, there are sort of a number of things that are going on. There's a deliberate flattening of the 3 dimensions into more of a 2-dimensional shape. That's deliberate. It's to try and, as I say, sort of create for the want of a better word, an iconic image of each tree. All of these trees have tremendous character, it's this tree, it has been around potentially for 1,000 years. As many of you will know, it's almost impossible to age these ancient oaks because the center of the trunk has long been eaten out by fungus. One can calculate the girth, but anyway, that tremendous age, the longevity, gives them wonderful character. And that's what I'm attempting to do with these drawings, is to create, put their character onto the canvas, onto the paper, in a way that shows them as portraits to their very best. If we move on to the next tree, this is a tree in Colk Abbey in Derbyshire, called the Old Man of Colk. Colk Abbey has got many, many ancient trees. This one, to my mind, is the most beautiful character. It's not huge, but it absolutely talks about the journey that these ancient oak trees go on. It's a pollard, as again, many of you will know that most of these oaks that I drew are pollards. The pollarding perhaps has helped them in some way. The harvesting of the branches has saved them from storm damage because they're not as tall, they're not as perhaps at risk to storm damage. And the way this tree expresses so much of its age and its character is wonderful. And again, that's the deliberate flattening of the two-dimensionalizing of the tree, I think achieves some way, something goes towards expressing that character. Moving on to the next image. This is a fantastic oak in Devon. It's called the King John oak, and it was lost, in inverted commas, in some ancient parkland in Devon, which had been completely overgrown. Nobody of the last couple of generations knew the oak tree was there, so I am told, until about 10 years ago. Somebody stumbled across it, and in amongst its branches, all these extraordinary branches that come out towards you, were a whole series of ash trees growing, and which was why it's created this astonishing tree. The reason I've included it is, although most of the ash trees have been cleared, it's not possible still to see this tree in its entirety. From any angle, you will find that there are other trees impinging on it. But that's where the artist has advantage over the photographer. I was able, in the field studies, to step back and do a section at a time and then glue them all together when I came back into the studio, if you like, so that there is the tree in its entirety, this astonishing oak tree, still just about alive, only just, but still with one or two twigs with buds on the ends, and just almost an outrageous character. How could you fail not to fall in love with something like that? And certainly, that for me, the whole journey of this thing has been a love affair with these ancient oaks. Moving on to an oak in Gloucestershire. I've chosen this tree because, alas, it's dead. And part of the driving force that I had to do this was my own and you know, shared anxiety with climate change, with the threat that these oak trees face from our activities. Might we be the last couple of generations to bear witness to them, to see them? I hope not, but it was certainly one of the driving thoughts in my head when I started the series. I wanted to make a record following in Jacob Strutt's footsteps, but to put down a record of these trees should the worst happen. And this tree has been dead. When I went to see it, it had been dead for perhaps 10 years. So, you know, it'll last as a hulk for another 50, 70 years, but not much longer. And that was, as I say, one of the driving forces behind it. Moving on to where I am today, I am currently attempting to do the same for Britain's ash trees. if we move on to the ash tree image, this is a work in progress. I have been doing the same, traveling the country, consulting on great ash trees and ash trees of worth. Clearly with the ash, it doesn't reach the same age as the oak, but these veteran ashes nonetheless have fantastic characters. And I've put together a list of 20 ash trees from the Scottish borders down to the tip of Cornwall, pretty much, I think, yes. And I'm working my way through them. However, with the exception that I don't have Felix Dennis with me, and I'm having, in this occasion, to put together a series of drawings with individual patrons. And at the moment, I have 6 people have stepped up and said, yes, I will commission you to do this, to help create a series, with the hope that we can do the same thing. We can create a record of Britain's most significant ash trees that can come together in a book and a show or whatever. I mean, in some ways, a bit of a tragic story, as I have traveled around and seen many of these trees are in dire straits already. But some are in better state than others. However, that's what I'm up to. If anybody out there knows anybody who wants to join the series, please let me know. So that's pretty well where I would be coming from, Sarah. I'm very happy to expand if you are prepared to prompt. Living, as I say, most of my life I live as a recluse in my studio. I'm not a great talker. So I go whole weeks without talking to anybody except my dogs.
And, Mark, you've inspired us all by just hearing about your practice and seeing these beautiful, beautiful portraits of the trees. And I can see that we have got a number of questions that have come in. So maybe we can, don't know whether we want to stay, maybe unshare, and perhaps we could take some questions which have come in. Okay. Wonderful. I mean, the first question was from Christiane, who said, that she felt she could see figures in the trees, that she could see, you know, a face with hair. So do you think that trees have tree spirits?
Well, as I was, certainly these trees have character. And, you know, I think I say in the book that one of the things that I was attempting to do was to, if trees have a soul, was to somehow sort of get a bit of that feeling of the tree's soul onto the canvas. Certainly we imbue those trees with character. We Homo sapien, that's what we do, and that's what I do as an artist. And as a you know, someone pointed out that as artists, one can act as an interface between the subject, the tree, and the viewer who comes to look at the art. And that's what I would be attempting to do, would be to put character in. Absolutely, these trees have character. Whether they have, yes, maybe there are spirits, wood sprites in amongst them. Certainly when in creating the each one of the portraits, and there is a degree of stylization. And I would be aware of these wonderful shapes. Yes, but wood sprites, perhaps.
I can see lots of people in the Q&A are saying that they also saw faces and figures and tree spirits. So obviously, you know, it is, you say, it's very close to people's hearts. I've got a sort of a double, two-sided question now. One is, Katie asked, does photography have a place in your initial work? But I think we're also interested to know whether how you choose the angle of the tree, because you say you can go all the way around. So how does that work?
Okay, so Yeah, it's great fun. I say great fun. I enjoy it. So you go to the tree. There it is, standing in its field or its woodland edge, and one of the great pleasures is this moment of sort of, it's the blind date, and you meet this tree, and I walk around and around the tree, and you're walking. I'm looking always for the angle. How that comes, as a filmmaker, I developed an eye for composition. Obviously, one spends a lot of time looking down the lens, and so I have an eye for composition, and it is a case of you continuing to walk around until yes, that is it. That is the angle. I would sometimes do 2 or 3 field studies. Very seldom now. I'm very much sort of able to find, yes, that's it, that's the angle. I then, when I've got that angle and I've found the exact distance that I want to be away from it, it's important not to be too close. You have to sort of step back. I find that angle, I mark the spot. I will sit there and do these field studies until I think I've got the right, they're small drawings, they're about that sort of size. And then once I've got that, yes, the answer is I use a camera, absolutely. It's a vital tool in what I do, because for me, detail is important. I'm not a photorealist, you know from the drawings that these are a long way from photorealism. That's not what I'm attempting, but I will take from the exact spot that I'm standing using a 52mm lens, which is the nearest to the human eye, by the way. I use the 52mm lens and I take a whole series of detailed photographs, a photograph of here, of here, of here, all of these photographs. And then when I get back to the studio, I can work with, I have a screen up beside me, a video screen, a wonderful tool to artists. This notion that photography and art somehow shouldn't ever get muddled is nonsense. If you go right back to the Impressionists, they knew straight away when the camera came along they were going to use it, and we've all used it since. Certainly for me it's vital, because I can then think, yes, did that, how did that branch go? I just want to have a quick look and see how did all of that. So I just then can look on the screen, put the image up. Yes, photography is a vital part of what I do, but it's secondary to this process of walking around the tree, finding the angle, sitting down and translating that onto paper to make sure it's going to work.
Great, thank you. There's a question from Kitch who says, were the drawings displayed at all on completion, and are they on display now?
Right, so on completion, as I mentioned in my talk, Felix Dennis was persuaded, he volunteered that half of the trees should go to Kew, the permanent collection, and half to the Heart of England Forest. Heart of England Forest then loaned their 10 drawings, and yes, Kew put on a wonderful show in the winter of 2018-19, together with publishing a book which is still available from all good bookshops, including the Kew bookshop, by the way. So Kew did me proud on that. The drawings are then, unfortunately, they've been in store, but there is a show coming up in the following spring at the Harley Gallery, which will have the 10 trees from the Heart of England Forest collection. So I think it starts in April and runs for perhaps 3 months, if people are interested to go and see. Yeah.
Great. We can share that link if we can find it. Fiona asks, why did you choose pencil over other media?
Right, that's a good question. Pencil? Well, 2 things. One, I had been looking at Strutt and all these others. They're all black and white etchings, and I had that in the back of my mind. But working with pencil, it's a very it's a great medium for reducing everything to its essentials. So I know I'm working in color here, and that's a particular collector has asked me to work in color, which is fine. But when you work in pencil, it's because of you're working in black and white. It's a very it's the perfect medium for doing what I'm attempting to do, which is to create this iconic image of the tree separated from its background. I also love pencils. You know, as a boy, I drew. Pencil is a wonderful medium. I work with 3B. It's just, that's it. I have piles and piles and piles and piles of 3B pencil stubs all over my studio. It's a wonderful medium. On to this stretched Fabriano paper. Yeah.
Okay, we've got a question for Emma now, which is from Roderick for Emma. Do we know when the first recognizable oak tree appeared in art? Which tree genus appears most in the history of art? Do you have any feedback or thoughts on that one?
Crikey, well, that's quite an sort of encyclopedic question. I'm not sure that I can answer that directly, although I would say that certainly within the in the 17th century, you certainly get to see very distinctive trees that are known for their genus. And in fact, there is a quote that Roger Fry dismissed Claude Lorraine on the grounds that he was very careless in the way he articulated the branches. But other people felt that they were very true to the particular kinds of tree that they were. But I think it's probably in the 17th century, and I'm sorry not to be more precise about coming up with a specific tree. What I would say is that it would also be quite hard to. I would say that the oak has featured more as an individual portrait because of their spectacular, the way as Gilpin described it, that they lent themselves to composition. And the way that they have been fated in this country in particular. And I would say that it is the oak that has featured in this starring role. But you sort of think of marvelous other trees, ash trees as well, that feature in art. But I would say that it was the oak. But I apologize for not having those numbers to hand.
Thank you. Another one for Mark. Well, it's actually for both of you. What would you like to see happen to ancient trees once they have died? That's from Julie.
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the trees that I drew was the Pontefract oak, which was Wales at the time, Wales's oldest oak tree in North Wales. And after I had drawn it, it was felled by a gale. There was a northerly gale in 2013, and very unusual to get a northerly gale. And the poor old tree was blown over. I went back later in the following summer. It was on a Welsh farm, and I was startled, to say the very least, to see it had simply been chainsawed up into firewood. Now, that's a sentimental view, I suppose. It would be fantastic if, I have thought, wouldn't it be amazing to get one of these ancient oaks once it's dead and get it into a museum or something? But they are huge. What would how could you possibly manage to get something like that into the museum? Perhaps you could make I don't know, furniture or I know after the gale that the hurricane in 1987, was it 86, 87? A number of furniture makers took trees that were felled and created furniture out of them. So you could do that. Hard to say how you. I personally have a collection of small pieces that I've asked landowners when I've been at these trees, little pieces that have fallen off, which I treasure. They're just little lumps of them. But I wouldn't recommend that anybody else goes around gathering the trees. That was with permission of the landowner, etc., etc.
I suppose
Yes, Emma, what are you?
Yeah, so I suppose picking up on your point there, Mark, about furniture making. I mean, indeed, there are furniture makers who wait for particular trees and then indeed make furniture out of them. And I think that is one way of honoring the life of a great tree, is to then use the wood to make fabulous pieces. And increasingly nowadays, I mean, one company, Goldfinger, for instance, based in London, absolutely uses trees that it knows have had to be cut down for one particular reason or another, and makes pieces out of them. Or Sebastian Cox, who works together with people who manage woodland. And so every single piece of wood he uses for furniture has been sourced and thought about. But I also remember I've always been impressed by the way that Oliver Rackham would write about trees, and also about the contribution they could make to an environment even once they were dead. In other words, as habitats for innumerable creatures. And so I suppose whether the tree has an afterlife in that sense, or whether it becomes a piece of furniture or a wonderful piece of turned wood, that there is more beyond even once the tree has died.
I see that Julie Atwell is saying it's not sentimental, and I agree, Julie, it's not sentimental. I just for me, I'll tell you what I feel. For me, the tree standing in nature is it. Afterwards, yes, but it's a bit like having a stuffed elephant in a museum. I'm not sure how, I don't know. Yes, Keith Knight says, leave them where they fall. They are wonderful as they decay. And certainly they're very, very, it's very important, as we know, for the entire ecosystem to leave them, indeed for owls, as Stuart is saying, but to leave them for all of those funguses, beetles, insects, etc., etc. And in fact, that is now part of the ELMS, the Environmental Land Management Scheme. I think if you're signed up to the very highest level and trees fall, you have to leave them where they lie. I believe that is the case in certain instances, that in order that they can contribute in their death to the wider ecology.
I think, sadly, we don't have time for any more questions, but we will try and answer those that we haven't answered. If we can, we'll answer them separately later. But I wanted to thank both of you, Mark and Emma, so much for sharing your stories, for warming our souls with these beautiful tree portraits and the history of them. I just wanted to say to everyone who's been here, if you'd like to find out more about Mark's work or own one of his tree portraits, give one to someone for Christmas. You might need rather large stocking to put one that's 1.5 meters in, but there are smaller editions too. Or even if you want to commission one of the 20 ash studies that Mark is currently working on, then please contact Emmeline at the Tree Art Gallery. We'll put her, there she is. Hi, Emmeline. And we will put that link into the chat so that if you want to talk to Emmeline, she'd be delighted to hear from you. And Mark has incredibly generously giving a royalty, a commission, a gift to the Tree Council for any portraits which people do purchase. So thank you for that, Mark. And we'll also put the contact details for Mark's book. I'm going to try and show it. It is the most beautiful book. It's very hard to show on here. You can see it there. And again, the link will be in the chat if you'd like to get that. I think it's on sale at Kew in the Kew bookshop. So look in the chat box for that. So thanks to everyone for joining us on Action Oak Day, for caring for the trees. And although we've talked about Dutch elm disease, we've talked about oaks, we've talked about ash dieback, let's kind of leave leave on a note of hope. The latest research into ash resilience shows that 30%, it seems, more or less, are going to be resilient. And so hopefully they can see new generations of disease-resistant ash for the future. Action Oak is doing lots of research to help safeguard the future of our oaks. And thanks to Mark, future generations will have these wonderful tree portraits with a really detailed record of the nation's majestic trees. So they'll be there as a kind of an artistic beauty record, as well as just a record of these great veterans. So enjoy the last few days of National Tree Week. We have one final piece of news, which is that as part of the Tree Council's 50th anniversary, we've been honoured to be a Radio 4 Charity of the Week in December. So we'll be sending around details of that. Do listen out for it. Ben Fogel, who's the sort of adventurer, explorer, and great tree lover, is our presenter for that. We hope you'll support us if you can. So thank you again from all of us. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Many thanks.
I can see lots of nice messages. Thank you for a wonderful session, says Sam. So inspiring. Mark, have you an Instagram? We could put that if you do.
Yes, I do. It's Mark Frith. Yeah, trees.
Maybe we can put that in the chat.
Yeah.
So that you could post some of your process. Thank you so much. Really wonderful seeing the beautiful drawings.
Yeah.
And also, Sarah, on the exhibition next year, it hasn't been launched yet, but anyone can contact me or Mark, and we can keep it posted as when that's going to be advertised. But it will be from April at the Harley Gallery, which is Welbeck, Nottinghamshire.
Lovely. Thank you. Great idea.